From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
More evidence links 3CX supply chain attack to North Korea. Dish slapped with multiple lawsuits after ransomware cyber attack, and the Genesis market platform seized by police. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Rich Gautier, the former CISO with the Department of Justice Criminal Division. Rich, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Well, this a veritable embarrassment of riches is brought to you by our sponsor today, Normalize. Regain visibility, control, and trust of your data. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, the easiest way, go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop down, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. It's the third one down. Just click on it to join us. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's get started. First up here, more evidence links 3CX supply chain attack to North Korean hacking group. This is a follow-up on a story we discussed last week on the show. The supply chain attack on the enterprise phone company 3CX used hacking code that exactly matches malware previously seen in attacks by the notorious North Korean group Lazarus. And that's according to a new analysis by Sophos, who pointed at the shellcode loader as the smoking gun. So, Rich, we hear a great deal about the arch enemies of cybersecurity, such as Lazarus or groups like Cozy Bear. It's always the first thing in the headlines, but is that the right thing to do? Does, I guess, identifying the attacker help with an organization's cybersecurity effort, or is it more of a distraction?
Well, I think that focus is because it makes the news more interesting. Bringing in the whole spy versus spy, root for your home nation field of the news, it speaks to something within us where we have an us versus them mentality that we need to feed. So the focus on who the bad guys are stands out. But as a defender, I don't think it's as relevant to what's the problem and how do I fix it, which we need to focus on. However, it does certainly make the news more provocative for the listener. Do we need to understand who the threat actors are? Yes, because it tells us something about their tactics, their techniques, procedures. But I don't think it's our primary focus in actually solving the underlying problems. We have to make sure we look at the supply chain from the customer's point of view. They weren't doing business with North Korea. It's not about who the attacker is for them. It's about the fact that software development pipeline wasn't completely secured, either at 3CX or their supplier. I can see CISOs being more and more interested in their third-party risk assessments, which is likely going to get expensive for vendors. And if risk assessments are being done, how well are they being done? We need to solve the problem of how we actually assess the security of our third, fourth, and nth parties. It's going to be expensive to be a trusted vendor, but software development and publishing pipelines should already be under a lot of scrutiny ever since the SolarWinds breach.
Yeah, definitely, definitely a reckoning moment for the industry, and yeah, that talking about that cost of kind of entering into that third party supplier relationship. You know, the math on that definitely has changed in recent years here. Our next story here, Dish slapped with multiple lawsuits after ransomware cyber attack. Dish Network is facing multiple class action lawsuits after it suffered a ransomware incident that was behind the company's multi-day network outage. At least that's what they called it. These lawsuits, filed across different states, allege that Dish overstated its operational efficiency while having a deficient cybersecurity and IT infrastructure. The legal actions aim to recover losses faced by Dish investors who were adversely affected by what has been dubbed a securities fraud. That is some pretty tough talk, and it moves the spotlight, I guess, off the technology and onto the reason why customers use the technology and why we pay so much for the privilege. You know, Rich, this class action suit is far from the only one out there. Obviously, other organizations are experiencing this kind of, legal action as well. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
Well, I think the securities fraud focuses actually more investors than customers. There's a lot of different security frameworks for measuring risk. And while I'm not sure of the specifics here, imagine that a stock type 2 or some other audit is presented to investors to make claims about a company's risk posture. Those audits are usually scoped to make sure that they can be done reasonably. The more you dig in with a security audit, the more weaknesses you end up finding. And that exposes more mitigation costs. IT security can really be seen as a necessary cost strain without advantage to the business's bottom line. But if it ties in a liability picture, companies will have to elevate its importance. Quality investments matter too. Litigation may end up being a market force that brings more investment to the infrastructure, like redundant systems with known good components and slower, maybe more careful development. Cyber insurance companies' risk awareness is rising, so they're going to limit their coverage. Consumer litigation would make cyber insurance even more costly. So after just a few lawsuits, telecom providers and other businesses are going to have a tough time managing litigation costs by themselves, and they'll eventually have to start investing in that quality. Telecom prices have steadily decreased for what we get today. I imagine if we paid in today dollars what we did for network services in 1990, we might have higher quality services. I mean, is there even a competitor that provides better service for slightly higher prices? It's been a really long time since my landline has had guaranteed uptime regardless of whether or not the power is out in my neighborhood. I might have kept my landline if it did.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about kind of the feedback cycle, kind of bringing in the insurance component into that. And certainly, yeah, the competitive market or lack thereof definitely plays a huge role into that as well. Next up here, Genesis Market Platform seized by police. On Tuesday, an FBI-led operation entitled Operation Cookie Monster seized Genesis Market, one of the most significant online platforms where criminals sell stolen credentials along with tools to weaponize that data. The market has been linked to millions of financially motivated cyber incidents globally, from fraud to ransomware attacks. It's believed that a large number of arrests related to the crackdown are being carried out globally. Obviously, Rich, it's always good news to hear of a successful takedown, and we've certainly been seeing. It seems like an uptick in these in terms in recent months. But what happens next, I think, is the more important question. The demand for these goods will always support a replacement marketplace. So, I guess what can law enforcement do?
Well, first of all, I'd like to offer my congratulations to the hard work that I know it takes to investigate, coordinate, plan, and execute multinational takedowns of criminal organizations. As a previous CISO within the DOJ, my focus was on our division's internal IT systems, but DOJ faces a difficult challenge as cybercrime continues to run rampant. It takes a village to execute on that mission, and I think I know how much work goes into those kind of things, but there's still a lot of work to do once the arrests are made. As to what they can do, as we say on the internet, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on Reddit. Look, also not an investigator, not a policeman. I'm sure they're already ready and planning on the next takedown to continue on executing their mission, but their mission is justice, and justice is essentially an after-the-fact mission. Crime in general is never going to end. I don't think it's really up to law enforcement to make us safe. It's in the name, law enforcement. We all have to get used to the fact that information is a commodity. That commodity will continue to be traded on black markets. As someone who works as a CISO, my job is to try to prevent the crime from either happening or at least from happening to my employer and their customers. For your listeners, the police have already set up a website to see if your ID was one of the ones for sale. Check it out at the links for today's show. I think you can post it in the notes.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll have it there. And yeah, definitely be sure to check that out if you were impacted. Next up here, DoD wants you to hack the Pentagon. The U.S. Department of Defense launched a new Hack the Pentagon website. This will serve as a companion for the Pentagon's existing bug bounty programs. These have been around for a while. They've started up in 2016 and will expand those efforts as the bug bounties will shift from project by project to help departments actually run continuous bug bounty programs within DoD. These programs will still only allow contributions from vetted security researchers, although the site potentially could make it easier to onboard new researchers onto projects over time. It seems to be one of the emphasis there. So, Rich, these programs have seemed to have been successful in the past, and certainly, another step by the government to tackle cybersecurity problems rather than to bury them, and kind of keeping up with industry practices. Despite the fact that only vetted security researchers are allowed to play, does your spidey sense ever tingle when it comes to saying, in effect, come and get us?
Wow, I wish I was a superhero because it'd make my job so much easier. I mean, if I had a spidey sense, right? It's a smart move for the DoD and other government agencies to embrace bug bounty programs, and it's cool how they're expanding them. I'm a strong believer in gamification. I find it motivating as a learner, and there's no doubt that these programs have shown an amazing ROI. It is, or at least it should be strangely comforting to a CISO to receive a phone call saying that they know about a previously undiscovered risk to their data. Once you get over that initial denial that sets in, it lets you prioritize a proven vulnerability. It lets you take a look at your program, why that risk wasn't previously identified. And I'd much rather receive that phone call or that report instead of one that says, we've had a breach and I have to figure out the who, what, where, when, how, and all of that. I think it's wrong, however, to say that the government buried cybersecurity problems. I think that they historically were unprepared to handle them at first, except maybe for one very specialized agency. And the rest just used the tool that they had at the time, which was arrest the hacker. I'm glad that we found a new tool. It provides security researchers with an outlet. It provides the organizations with crowdsourced cyber talent. Corporations and agencies are not as agile as individuals, so things that make sense from an individual point of view, they're completely out of character for a lumbering organization like DoD. It may have taken some time to come around to prefer partnering over prosecuting, but now this relationship has evolved, and that's a good thing all around.
Yeah, and the thing that really encouraged me to like see the embrace of kind of, like bug bounty culture is that moving from, before these would be like, it would almost be like sprints. It would feel like we're going to do this bug bounty on this one specific system. You're going to have and some of that had to do with access to those systems that needed to be, that had a limited access to vetted security researchers. But to think about how departments can do these continuously as opposed to project by project, I think speaks to the renewed commitment to kind of, move that battleship. Like you said, it is a lumbering beast, and it does take some time for sure. All right, before we move on to our next story, we have to give a few moments to our sponsor, Normalize. Normalize is a cloud data security platform that continuously discovers sensitive data and their access paths across your cloud environments. Normalize provides the ability to analyze, prioritize, and respond to data threats to prevent damaging data breaches. Their cloud native platform manages data security posture and compliance by automatically tracking risks to sensitive data, visually showing teams who can access what, and quickly block unauthorized access or vulnerable points of attack. Discover, visualize, and secure your cloud data in minutes with Normalize Freemium. Go to normalize.ai. Samsung reportedly leaked its own secrets through ChatGPT. Less than 3 weeks after Samsung lifted a ban on employees using the popular generative AI chatbot, the company has reportedly leaked its own secrets at least 3 times. The ban was originally intended to protect company data, but was lifted on March 11th to enhance productivity and keep staff engaged with the world's latest tech tools. According to a Korean local media report, these now leaked secrets include equipment measurement and yield data from the conglomerate's device solution and semiconductor business unit. One employee told the local outlet they copied all the problematic source code of a semiconductor database download program, entered it into ChatGPT, and inquired about a solution. So, Rich, clearly this is an attempt from a company to remain agile, but clearly also it shows the dangers of an untested and unregulated technology, or at least, dumping a ton of code into it. It may be unfair to single out Samsung, but eventually their products become part of our infrastructure as both consumers and companies. Could this be a cautionary tale for other organizations, or will it get drowned out amid the cacophonous Chat GPT hype?
So I don't think this is the new problem, and I've definitely been on both sides of this argument. Can I use insert new toy here to do my job? On one side, you need the tools to be able to be competitive, but at the same time, you also have to understand and manage the risks that come along with using third-party services, whether it's Google Translate or ChatGPT or whatever. Third-party risk is first-party risk after all. So if IT security is too slow to manage that risk, they become the Department of No, or at least the Department of Slow, and that impacts the competitive advantage for the business. We have to create agility around managing that risk. For example, one thing we can do is teach and preach to employees about the risks and then make decisions once we've done at least that much. It sounds like this was an on or off decision at first, and maybe it should have been a trained users instead of cautioned users decision to turn the access back on.
Yeah, I do definitely have sympathy for like the Samsung employee. It's like literally if you're following any like tech media, like it's just a deluge of this kind of stuff. And all we hear is this is going to, hypercharge productivity and all that kind of stuff. And I can and we even covered on this show of using it to generate code, using it to generate malware, or a wide variety of use cases. So, yeah, I, I have been on that side as well. Of even if it's something as simple as an IM client, of like, well, my work won't let me do it, so I'm just gonna figure out how to do it on my own. And like this is just generative AI shadow IT, right? At this point, yeah, to your point, not that a problem we understand, and we still have trouble dealing with it. So an interesting evolution of it for sure. Next up here, many workers will willing to take a pay cut to work remotely, according to a recent survey. Americans have grown so fond of working from home that many are willing to sacrifice pay on an average of up to 18% for the privilege of skipping the office. This is according to a recent survey by the recruiting firm Robert Half. Three-quarters of workers who responded said they are happier and more productive when they're working from home, despite sometimes having to work longer hours. Yet, those preferences are finding pushback from employers to get people back into the office. A recent Resume Builder survey found that 9 out of 10 companies will require employees back in the office in 2023. So, Rich, pretty straightforward question. What's your preference?
Well, the math works out with an hour commute each way, that's for sure. I can't pretend that becoming used to remote work didn't affect me and my career decision to take an early retirement. I mean, talk about your pay cuts. But the world changed, whether we like it or not, and IT capabilities made a lot of that possible. As a manager, I can see the reasons for wanting to have your employees bond with each other and the company to build cohesion and commitment, but I'm not so sure that the only answer is to make them all come into an office. I think that we have a tendency to accept situations that come about naturally rather than things we're forced to do, and that requirement is going to feel forced. I see more churn in the workforce ahead, and considering the shortages in the cyber workforce overall, I think managers are going to have to invest in improving their remote management skills.
Do you see anything? We've heard a lot of talks of metaverse, but we've seen advancements in just virtual meeting technology. Do you see anything like that with kind of virtual meeting spaces maybe filling some of that need?
So I have a VR headset myself, two of them, in fact. I haven't used them in about 6 months. VR is fun, don't get me wrong, but we're still a ways away from it being useful for meetings. Quite frankly, Zoom, Teams, those types of things are working great. When the pandemic started and we sent everyone home, I had a daily team stand up and I was able to manage team cohesion and taskings over that technology. The one thing I wish for, better physical to virtual whiteboard connected solutions. There's no better feeling than standing at a whiteboard holding a marker while I explain my harebrained ideas to my team.
Yeah, they at least need to virtually make that squeak of the marker. Nothing makes you feel more productive than that, right?
I want to physically hold the marker.
Yeah, it's so good. All right, our last story here, definitely a related story, the security costs of remote work. The security firm Lookout released its State of Remote Work Security Report, which included survey results on how the pandemic-fueled practice impacts security. The report found that 92% of remote employees perform work tasks on personal devices, while 32% of remote and hybrid workers use apps not approved by IT, ChatGPT perhaps being one of them. As a result of both practices, corporate data is increasingly being accessed by means not visible to IT or security, increasing the risk profile potentially of an organization. The report also found that 90% of remote workers access corporate networks from areas outside their home, an average of 5 locations. 45% of respondents said they use the same password for work and personal accounts. I feel like that might not just be exclusive to remote workers, however, here. So, Rich, very human factors coming into the workplace dilemma here. It's easier and less of a hassle to use one device. Not a new problem, but it seems to show that we are still maybe sliding down a slippery slope. I'm curious your thoughts.
So, first of all, let me say, if your accounts are still using only passwords for access, go solve that problem first. If I remember anything from reading the book Hackers years ago, it's that the people who implemented passwords didn't even like the idea, didn't take it seriously. The only reason they added it was because they had to. So the original implementation definitely lacks some serious engineering thought. Multi-factor authentication should be your new normal. The bring your own device problem isn't new either, but the world has changed a lot since we started trying to solve it. Data is no longer stored and accessed from one location that you can put a boundary around and set up your defenses. Remote work and the pandemic have only served to accelerate that change. So if you haven't invested in zero trust practices or at least have a zero trust strategy by now, it's past time to do so. Organizations that are holding on to legacy ideas have to roll out distributed defenses like cloud-centric EDR and check for device security before allowing access to data, except that you can no longer have your castle and moat. And I was definitely an old castle and moat man. So that means modernizing your security policies, your user policies, your data architecture. And I can see that being expensive for those who are not prepared for it, but there's some good wins to be had with a good zero trust strategy. Not the least of which is actually getting around to inventorying what data you have, where it's stored, and exactly how it's accessed.
Yeah. If nothing else came out of covering GDPR for years as it was slowly rolling out, it was, the cost of knowing what data you actually have. And I think the pandemic has driven that home in other markets as well, for sure. Before we get out of here, Rich, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you today?
Well, I think that the Operation Cookie Monster, just the name alone, a call back to where I used to work and just the name of the operation. I think that's the best story for today.
All right. And Rich Gautier, the former CISO of the Department of Justice Criminal Division, thank you so much for being on the show. We truly appreciate your time and dropping all the expertise on us. Where can people find you online if they want to follow all of your good stuff?
Well, I think that LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Excellent. And we will have that in the show notes. All right.
Thanks for
Well, thank
inviting
you.
me.
Absolutely. We will definitely have to have you back on because we had the perfect story rundown today. Lots of great stuff to get your takes on. So I truly appreciate your time. Thank you also to our sponsor, Normalize, regain visibility, control, and trust of your data. A reminder, there will be no Super Cyber Friday next week, but we'll be back with another episode of the Week in Review show with another expert guest. We can't wait to see you. In the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Also, a reminder, we're going to be having a live audience recording of the CISO Series podcast April 13th in the Big Apple. That's right, New York City. For more info and to register, head to our events page on CISOseries.com. That's just about it for today's show. I am Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.